Okay, hello everyone. This is the Day Zero podcast that we're going to be doing. We don't yet have an intro, but so this is kind of our
Hold
intro
up,
for now.
I screwed that
What?
up.
What do you mean what do you mean you screwed it up?
I had Twitch in the background, so audio was coming through twice.
Oh, okay.
We're good now, though.
We're good now?
You can
Okay.
go ahead and
So I'll
say
do
the
the
same
intro
thing again.
Okay. So this is the Day Zero podcast. We don't yet have an official intro, but so this is going to have to do for now. I'm Spectre.
And I'm Z.
And I'm Nancy.
All right. So this podcast is basically just going to be talking about reverse engineering, exploit development, and anything really at a technical level, like interesting news and stuff like that that's been happening. And the biggest piece of news that's happened in the last little bit is probably the release of Ghidra by the National Security Agency. It's a disassembler tool, and it's free, which is nice considering, the standard before that was IDA, which is a ridiculous amount of money. So
I'm gonna jump in, interrupt you. Is it Ghidra? Is it Ghidra? Who knows how to
I have
pronounce
no
this?
idea. I'm just gonna call it Ghidra.
Yeah, I've
I
been
have no
saying
idea.
kind of my mental sound of it has been Ghidra, but Ghidra. I don't even know what I say, to be honest. I probably use every pronunciation of it available.
Okay, we'll just do that.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Has there been any official word on? I'm assuming the RSA presentation he says it correctly, but is that even online?
Yeah, I think it's online. I just haven't watched it.
Is
It's
it?
been
Because
kind
I
of
know I was
messy, right?
looking for it right after it should have gone, because I know it wasn't streamed. I know a bunch of people were sitting on some other random presentation that the only one that was streamed at the time, and it's like, where's Ghidra? Where's this? This isn't the right talk.
Oh, okay.
I feel like, yeah, it's a good
Anyway,
question.
I'm just gonna call it Ghidra. We'll just go.
Yep, fair enough.
But that being said, have you gotten a chance to really play with it, Z?
So I was playing it with that night it came out, and I mean, kind of speaking about Ida there, I mean, I don't quite think it's an Ida killer. I know there's definitely a
Okay.
lot of people kind of saying that, but I mean, the big thing that I was interested when it first came out was testing the decompiler. Because quite frankly, the free options for decompilers are shit. You've got what, like Snowball? Oh no,
Yeah,
you've used Snowball before? I think.
I I think I
Like
have
looked
just
at
a long
it.
time ago. Like I can't remember much about it, but I remember that it was bad. I just don't
Yeah, I
remember
mean
much about the
it's
specifics.
free, so it does something, but yeah, it's probably like I hate to kind of it's not an easy thing to build, but at the same time it really wasn't useful. I mean, it didn't even, if I recall correctly, it wouldn't even do the jump table. Uh, like resolve your
Okay.
jump table, so you'd be going like, okay, this is jumping to some random place here. Oh, that's the entry for S scanf or something. And you'd have to kind of go through that extra step that just made it a complete hassle to actually use. Then, I mean, R2 and RetDeck are kind of the other two free options. RetDeck, I haven't had enough time to actually play with. I did use it on a MIPS binary a long time before they open sourced it. RetDeck's the one from some malware company. I can't remember which one.
Okay.
Uh,
Um,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say with R2, yeah, you're right, it is free, but I haven't really used the command line one. I tried using their front end, the cutter, I think it's called, and
Yeah,
it was just like really bad. Like if you tried to load anything that wasn't like a CTF size binary in it, it would just crash. Like it wouldn't do anything. So
so
I don't know if it's still like that, but
I haven't used it in a little while either. I had a very similar experience though. That said, I've talked about it a few times privately with you. It was just like, the one thing I loved about R2 was the fact that it had or not web API, a web interface that I could load up on my phone. And I remember playing DEF CON CTF off my phone in line at a grocery store.
that's a
So
very
I
useful
mean,
feature.
that is a feature I haven't seen in IDA. I don't see it in Ghidra. I
Therefore,
mean,
R2 wins.
yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
But I mean, at the decompiler level, which again, as I said, for Ghidra, that I think was kind of the killer feature coming out, is if the NSA was providing this amazing decompiler. And I know some of the comments on Reddit, a user had made mention that, the decompiler was like so good, people rarely use the flow view.
Yeah, the graph view. If that said, if you want to pull up the screen share, I actually do have like a little example prepared just
In
showing.
Europe.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so this is from a FreeBSD kernel, VN close. So it's for closing vnodes. What it does isn't really that important, but you can see I have it open in IDA and in Ghidra. So this is the view in IDA. It's really messy. Like, look at this statement. Like that doesn't really tell me anything. And then it's just really messy. But when we go over to Ghidra's, it's actually like formatted really well. And this statement is still, it's not perfect, but I think this looks a lot better than IDA. I might actually be able to do like a little side by side compare here. But yeah, I think you could argue here that Ghidra definitely has the better decompiler, from what I've seen anyway. That being said, I haven't used the decompiler a ton to make that say that 100%. But from what I've seen, the Ghidra decompiler has been better generally.
Yeah, it's hard, I think, without giving it a lot of test cases. Do you want to keep the dual display up?
The
Um,
IDA and the
yeah,
Ghidra.
having them both side by side still. I mean, one
Yeah.
question is, did you have to set up any types on Ghidra? Because that was one of my initial things I noticed, is that it didn't have,
Keep.
at least with Windows, I think, it didn't have a lot of the Windows types built in. So when I was comparing with IDA, IDA has those types kind of already built in, or I already had them loaded. Maybe I load them into IDA. I don't recall. Um, does IDA like you pull in PDBs? Yeah, it
Yeah,
does. But
but the
go ahead.
well, I was gonna say I have heard about that with Windows stuff. It is, IDA does have a bit of an edge there where it pulls in the types and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's something I noticed. But I don't know. With your decompilation here, you've got, undefined 8, undefined, whereas what IDA's giving you are the uh, presumably more accurate types. I mean, sure, it's just calling them like, by the size, so, is that's not the actual type, of course, or I guess it might be. I'm not familiar with the function. But that is kind of one of the key differences I see between the two is when it comes to typing, IDA seems a lot more intelligent about coming up with those. Although when I have been able to load in the types to Ghidra is definitely to make use of those and kind of puts them on more or less equal footing. There hasn't been too much where I've been like, why is it decompiling it that way?
yeah, but I must say though, like with IDA, with the more detailed type information, like you were saying, in a way, I'd actually prefer the less, like Ghidra's kind of less detailed one, just because sometimes IDA does give you those details and they're completely wrong, and it can really throw off when you're trying to look at it. Like it'll say it's a constant pointer or something, and then you see it's doing like weird math on it, like not pointer math, like looks like it's using it as an integer, and you're just really confused. Whereas in Ghidra, if it just says it's an int, then you can, like I think it can work both ways. With IDA, it can help you, but it can also hurt you if it's wrong.
Yeah, that's a fair point. One thing on that I'm also noticing is I noticed, and I'm actually only noticing with your side by side, is that Ghidra does do while loops. I think there were two in there if you scroll down, but whereas IDA is
Yeah.
giving you while one, or the infinite loop that way. And I noticed that right after Ghidra came out, Malware Attack I think did his stream, and he had another do while come up.
Yeah.
And one of the comments there said that in assembly it actually was a do while. But seeing that, since you said that's from FreeBSD, it does the actual source use a while or does it use a do while? Because when I've looked at the FreeBSD code, I don't recall seeing a lot of do whiles.
So I could actually check that.
I mean, of course, one of the questions is like, even if the code does that, did the compiler optimize it to a do while?
Yeah.
But that is one of the things. It looks like Ghidra tends to default to showing do whiles, just based on that observation. I've seen it a few times, not based on any actual study of the output.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at it here. I'm just trying to see where the loop comes from. VN close. Um, it might be in one of these macros actually. I wouldn't be surprised if it's this one. Yeah, so it is actually a do while in this case.
Okay,
It's in
that's
it's a
interesting then.
giant macro.
That's kind of interesting to me then that Ghidra's picking that up and Ida isn't.
Yeah, I noticed that a few times. I don't know why, like IDA can't pick that up. Like it has the condition here, but it just like, yeah, it jumps out of the loop
Oh
here
yeah,
with
yeah,
this
I see
condition
that.
instead. But yeah, the do while is definitely a lot more readable.
Yeah,
So
and I mean the do while is also more accurate.
yeah,
So
um,
I'd have to say that's definitely a plus for Ghidra right there if it's kind of picking those things out. Because that's just kind of like, when it comes, you mentioned readability. It's just those little things where it's like you're seeing the condition in the right place then with the while loop instead of as you see it in IDA kind of
yeah,
being done.
kind of tacked on the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing too is with Ghidra, the disassembly view and the decompiler view is synced up very well. So if I just go to like some other function, it'll automatically, change it over.
Yes, I noticed that almost immediately.
Yeah.
Probably one of my favorite features there. I don't get why IDA never did that. Like, I guess it has to do with how they implemented the compiler itself, but honestly, like that's one of those things that you just wish you had, and I don't see why they didn't implement that into IDA. I mean, it gives you that kind of God bolt. I assume you've used God bolt before, where it kind of shows you the C code and the what the compiler produces, and you can kind of look at that.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
gives you kind of that output, and that's just really useful in terms of learning, I think. I mean, obviously, being able to sit with the code and be like, hey, this looks a little bit weird. Did decompile it right? Click on it, see it in the disassembly, and confirm yourself if it decompiled it correctly. But I could also see this being really useful just for learning, to be able to compile something, load it up in Ghidra, look at what its decompiler did, go back and forth, and see what structures it's recognizing as, certain language syntax, and kind of start reasoning about it from there. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of those features I just don't get why it wasn't even in IDA. It just seems so necessary now that you see it.
Yeah. And I mean, when you're looking at a large like this function isn't particularly large, it's kind of small compared to the fact that it's in a kernel. But when you're in a large function, it can be hard to get a grasp on the overall code flow of the function. And this is like a really good tool for that. And IDA, you have the graph view, but if you have a function that has really large blocks of stuff, it can be, and if you have like a jump table or something, it's like stupid how like it's displayed in the graph view and like super hard to follow. So yeah, I actually hope that IDA does kind of adapt this in a future version. If they do that, I think that'd be a really big feature update.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably a lot more complicated than I imagined, but I don't know. It seems like one of those really simple, almost polished type features where it's just something that's tacked on at the end. Which
Yeah.
is, I guess, kind of weird for Ghidra then, because the Ghidra UI really lacks polish, which I think is kind of one of the big things there. Is, I mean, on polish, Ida easily wins,
Yeah.
but I mean, the more I've used Ghidra, the more I'm starting to think like I could see myself using this as like my daily driver.
Yeah, and Ghidra also has some really nice UI features too, which is kind of interesting considering, like you said, a lot of people don't like the crude UI. Uh, But like, for example, the symbol tree, if you go into functions, it'll like group a bunch of functions by name together. So they're not like, in IDA, you have this list of 18,000 functions that like if you want to find anything in it, like you have to control F it, or if you want to scroll through it and try to find something but you don't know exactly what to search for, it's kind of a pain. Whereas in Ghidra, it's all grouped and you can kind of filter down to find what you want, which I think is a really nice UI feature.
Yeah, initially I didn't recognize that. I remember you had to point it out to me that I was seeing all these like different functions, and it was always, or I think it was classes because I was doing a Dex file at the time. But I remember it just listed like all these like AB, AK, AN, and like that's all it was showing me on that view, and that seemed really annoying. But once you point out that's just grouping them, it's not truncating the names, it's just grouping them like that. I mean that,
Yeah, it
like you
does
said,
look
it makes
like
it
that.
so easy to navigate. I mean there's the other window there, the symbol table, I think, which kind of gives you, it's not IDA's view, it gives you a lot more information, but in that one it doesn't group them up if you want to navigate that way.
Yeah, so
I
this is
don't
the
see why
symbol
you
table.
would. For navigating, that is. There are other reasons to use that, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, the tree's definitely nice, especially once you recognize kind of how it works. It's not intuitive, or at least it wasn't to me that it was grouping them. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that is a bit of a negative that it looks like it's clipping it. It doesn't look like it's grouping it, but
yeah, like it totally
once you know
makes
that.
sense once you know. It
Yeah.
just definitely, I didn't think of that when I first saw it. I thought it was just truncating all these names.
Yeah. Um, we've talked a lot of oh, we've talked a lot about Ghidra's positives, but there are a few negatives I've encountered, especially with large binaries like a kernel, for example. One of them is it can take forever for Ghidra to analyze the binary compared to IDA.
Yeah,
Like
performance
building
definitely
a pivot
isn't
table.
even on the same level, and I think that has to do. I'm just going to say it. I think that has to do with it being Java. I
Yeah,
obviously I don't know for sure. I don't know if they call out native functions or anything like that. As far as I know, like the full source has been released. All the features kind of have their source jar, like the source to the jar files. But I believe
yeah,
there's still more source to be released. Last I checked, the GitHub didn't have that.
yeah.
Um,
I remember they hadn't released the source yet for the decompiler. I don't know if they've done that yet or not.
well, so have you looked at what's inside of the decompiler.jar or dash source jar?
I
I
haven't, but I've heard that the decompiler is actually written in C,
Yeah,
C++.
that would make sense that it calls
Yeah,
out. So yeah, I mean, we're still kind of waiting on source to make any determination, but I'm assuming just because of the Java aspect, that has a big impact on performance. I know you can increase the threads. I thought the thread count on mine was low. I don't remember where you do that.
yeah. It's in auto analysis and options, edit options.
Yeah.
I changed it to 30, but it seems that it lost that
Okay,
setting.
see, I
But
bumped mine up to 16, which is the number of cores that I've got on my system. And that
okay,
seemed like, I don't think, going too high above that. I guess if you've got the whatever it is, the CPU like multi-threading stuff. I can't think of the name of that feature right now. But basically, where they fake having extra threads that you can run, so they run some commands or some instructions in parallel during some of the micro pauses.
yeah,
So it gives you technically a higher thread count. You can maybe push your thread count into that. I don't know if 30 is a good choice unless you've got like 30 actual cores.
I definitely don't. So
Yeah, because
maybe I'll
I
lower
mean,
it.
you have that thread switching, or you have the context switching overhead with that. So I'd say like 16 seems to make sense for me, and it did improve the performance a little bit. I was testing on kind of like a large MIPS binary when
Yeah,
I was doing that, and it, shaved off. I want to say like 10 minutes, which was pretty significant. Although it took, I think the total was like 40, so I guess that cut off like 25% of the time. But of course,
yeah,
that's anecdotal. Varies depending on what you're doing. I have no idea if it had like a warmed cache or anything that would have helped.
yeah.
So
So yeah, analyzing speed aside, there is another issue I've encountered. I don't know if there's other issues like it, but the UD2 instruction specifically. Let me just go down a little bit. Oh wow, it actually did continue analysis here. Let me just see if it's at another spot. Yeah, so right here, you can see it kind of stopped analyzing and disassembling here. And the reason is on this mutex lock sleep call, it says that it's a flow override. And the reason is if we go into that, there's a branch where it will call panic and then UD2. So it just kind of like halts. And as soon as it encounters a UD2 opcode, it seems to just kind of like stop disassembling the rest of it until the next function, and it marks it as like a never return.
Yeah, so I've seen that in a couple other places. And I know what you can do is you can tell it basically just to keep disassembling right when you encounter it. You can mark those question marks. I think it's either a right click or you can probably press D or something, and it'll tell it to treat it as code.
Yeah, with
And
D.
then it'll kind of go and do what it should. But I mean, yeah, I agree. That is kind of a negative there that pulls that out. The other thing, actually, do you have any more examples of that before I go on to another negative?
I don't think I have any more examples of that. The only thing I wanted to add on there is, I don't know if you'll really be encountering opcodes like this in normal binaries anyway. I think kernels are
I
kind of
think
a
you run
special
into a
case.
similar situation. I'm not sure if it was um, exactly that UD2. It might have been something else, but I've kind of seen where it stops earlier. It sees illegal instructions. Actually, I think was what it was saying. Like I've seen that on userland binaries. So and they weren't caused by the panic. So I mean, Ghidra's definitely doing something weird there.
Yeah.
So the
So
other big negative, I think, though, is the no debugger.
yeah, I've heard that as well.
I mean, that is, I guess, IDA's big feature is,
Yeah.
it's interactive debugger.
Hmm.
That said, that's where I'm kind of hopeful. You've got this open system, in theory, once they kind of release more. You can build plugins. I have to imagine, just glancing at the API looks pretty thorough. You should be able to build like an attack or a plugin that'll give you a debugger. That'll kind
Yeah.
of run in there, set the registers for you, do all that as you're running. I think it's just a matter of somebody going out and building it or building something that'll connect to some of the normal debug servers.
Yeah.
So it's a downside right now. It's not there. I don't think that's going to be permanent. I think, the next 6 to 12 months is going to make or break Ghidra in terms of what type of plugins do we start seeing people build. And I mean, if somebody wants to kind of break into the security industry, building a Ghidra plugin that gets used right now would be a good thing to do. That would, definitely make your resume. And if I saw that on somebody I was going to be interviewing, that would be something that would stand out. I wouldn't care too much about the rest. Well, I would care about the rest of their resume, but seeing something like that, getting involved with open source, would be a good thing to do. So this is a perfect place to kind of jump in where you can make a big impact.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the strong points I've heard about IDA as well, is one of IDA's strong points is in its community and the plugins that have been built up for it over the years. Um, and I think Ghidra could actually overtake IDA in that as well, because,
It's not behind a paywall.
and not only that, I've heard that I haven't looked at it too much, so I'm kind of going off of what I've heard, but I've heard that the API for Ghidra is also a lot more solid than IDA's, because IDA's like you can write a plugin and then a minor revision later it just stops working because they've made some change in the API for some reason, and they just kind of do it without telling anybody. So it's like it changes so much that a lot of plugins break and have to be updated. Whereas with Ghidra, from what I've heard about the API, it seems very consistent and a lot more cleaned up.
Yeah, I feel like part of that has to do just with, who's using it. The fact that this is something being used internal to the NSA. They needed to keep things modular enough that they can, remove sensitive plugins from people who shouldn't have access to that. It just makes sense that their plugin system is a little bit more robust.
Yeah.
That said, we don't really know for sure right now what that's going to look like.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. Like it's literally just been released, so
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely hopeful when it comes to the plugins, when it comes to that API, that it's going to be very useful, that people are going to build on it. But, the community needs to start jumping on that. Obviously, it's still early. Like, I can't say people should have jumped on it already. It hasn't even been a week yet, was it?
yeah, it hasn't been a week yet. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
last
so.
Wednesday. So
And they don't have the full source out.
yeah,
But, I don't know. I'm really hopeful with it. This is a base that I would want to build on. I mean, as
yeah,
much as we can point to R2 as being, another open source option that you can go build on, some people have. R2 just doesn't feel like that solid of a foundation to me. I mean, again, I don't want to be hating on people who do this open source work. It's absolutely valuable to have that free option there, but
yeah.
at the same time, I've just never really felt inclined to build onto R2.
So I guess would you say the biggest issue with Ghidra right now then would be that initial analyze speed? Because that does seem like it'd be a harder issue to fix compared to like, the UD2 stuff and stuff
It
like that.
is, but at the same time, I think it depends on how you're running it. I mean, this isn't like Binja or Binary Ninja, where you have to, if you're using the cheaper option, have to analyze every time you open it.
Yeah, that's true.
The analysis is a one-time thing, so yeah, it sucks to kind of have that at the start.
Now
But it
that does
is
actually. Oh,
just,
sorry.
it
Yeah,
is
I didn't.
just the one time. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that does actually bring up another point though. The fact that it saves to a database. Um, I have looked at the database files that are created. So for this project, the IDA database file is around, I think, 100 to 200 megabytes, somewhere around there. The Ghidra project folder for the same, binary is like 5 gigabytes in size. So that is another thing that's like not optimal. Is
So that
like
could be
I
where the
yeah.
speed's coming in too. Maybe it's not Java. Maybe it's just writing so much and needing to do so many writes and hitting the hard drive or
Oh,
solid
you're
state drive.
cutting out a little bit there for me. I'm not sure if it's.
Oh,
Oh,
well,
I think you might be good now.
okay. I was just saying, like, that might even explain some of the performance is just the amount of writes that it's doing. If it's hitting, like, 5 gigs in writes, that takes some time, especially if these are small files or small writes.
Yeah.
So that might be where some of the performance hit is coming from.
Yeah. But I do wonder why they have to write that much. Like what? Like I haven't taken a look at it, so I don't know. Maybe that could
Nor
be
have
like
I.
something to do. But like, yeah, I don't know why they would need to write 5 gigs of information. Actually, it might be for stuff like the symbol table because I have noticed if I close and reopen it and go into the symbol table, it doesn't go through the process of sorting it and everything again. So that probably is part of it, is stuff like that.
I mean, that wouldn't really explain 5 gigs, though.
No, but yeah, I was just thinking that might be one of the reasons. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
don't
it
know
very well
exactly
might be
what it is.
storing a lot more data than IDA is about everything.
Mhm.
Just because, I mean, with IDA, it seems like the decompilation is just kind of a one-off thing, whereas that whole decompilation process is a little bit more tied to the disassembly. Like, now that you have it, if you were to say patch some of the instructions there, that would change what's in the decompilation. It kind of
Yeah,
keeps that live. So I imagine it might be storing a little bit more data for that. Again, probably doesn't explain the 5 gigs, but it explains part of it. And
yeah,
that's purely speculation.
yeah, yeah. I actually might take a look at some of the project files to see what's there and what's taking up all the space, because that would be interesting to see.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would probably just wait. I mean, if you want to look at it now and kind of RE it a bit, go for it if that sounds fun to you. Or you could just wait for the source to come out and see what it's doing.
yeah, that too.
I mean, presumably the source should be coming out here reasonably soon. I don't know if
Hopefully,
I
yeah.
haven't heard any date for it yet, though.
Yeah.
That said, I'm just looking up actually on the GitHub to see. Yeah, there hasn't been any recent
Hasn't been any
update.
hints or anything. Okay.
Of course, there's plenty of issues, which I think kind of leads us into the next thing. Did the NSA give out a backdoor? Or leave a backdoor in this? And I'm going to say no. For any
Yes.
of you listening that aren't familiar, within Ghidra, by default, this isn't the case, but if you launch a Ghidra, either there is like a Ghidra debug. I know there's a bat file. I don't know if there's an sh file, but there's a Ghidra debug, or if you call the launch with the debug option or debug suspend, which just does the normal starts it and then waits for the debugger to attach, or keeps it suspended until the debugger attaches, then it will actually run. But when you start it at that mode, it opens the Java debug wire protocol, or it opens a port listening with that protocol, which is the standard for Java debugging on kind of your wildcard address. So it's listening if you have like to the wider network. It's not only listening on localhost. So a bunch of people ended up complaining that, hey, this is an RCE in Ghidra, or two, this is a backdoor from the NSA. I just,
I mean, but they've released other software, haven't they?
oh yeah, the NSA has a ton of stuff. Both NSA Cyber and just NSA itself has a ton of repros on GitHub.
I mean, I'd venture to say it's not even really worth them backdooring it. I mean, likely they already have some very nice super project already in the works that they use, and that's why they released this. But I mean, it is Java, so I would assume, I believe it's Java, correct? The actual
Yeah.
application in Java.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I
So,
mean, the actual backdoor is actually just the fact it's in the Java VM. It's not something implemented into Ghidra either. It's a VM argument to open the debug port.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think that's, I mean, it's possible, but for the most part, like backdoors work best when it has like constant network connectivity, right? With this, I assume that it's not running 24/7, and so the actual attack surface for the NSA, if they want to execute against that backdoor, or I guess they're purposely designing things to target that actual software. I don't know.
Well,
It seems too specific of a case for a backdoor. Besides the
yeah,
fact that
that's
the
kind of what I was
NSA.
going to get. You have to start this in debug mode, and then it opens this up. It has to be in debug mode. When is the last time you attach a debugger to IDA, to Binary Ninja, to R2?
Yeah.
That's true.
Never.
I mean, who
It's
are they
good.
targeting with that backdoor? Like, nobody does that. Yeah, people do if they're actually working on it, of course, which is exactly where I think this came from. Probably within the NSA, they run all like the untrusted code, which would be like a new build of Ghidra in a VM. In a
Mhm.
VM, you're going to want to listen out to the network so like the host machine can connect. So I
Yeah.
mean, if their default setup was inside of a VM, which I can completely imagine. I have no idea, but I could completely imagine kind of that default setup being running this in a VM. Especially when you think, well, what are the cases they're probably going to have bugs? It's probably some malware they're analyzing. So again, they want it running on the network, not running on their host.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that could so easily just be overlooked. It's literally like address equals star is what it is. So it's not even they were looking for 0000 or anything for the wildcard host. It was address equals star, so easy to overlook. I imagine that's what the case is.
Yeah. Like it's definitely an issue, but is it a backdoor? No. Like especially because it's so obvious, right? It was found out within like an hour of it being released or something like that. Like if they were gonna purposely put a backdoor like that in there, would it really be that obvious?
Well, maybe they want you to think that though.
Oh man, bringing
Plausible
in
deniability,
thought
like,
now.
Yeah, no,
well,
I
it's
totally
so
agree.
simple.
It's
Yeah.
just it seems like if the NSA were going to backdoor something, especially since the type of people running this are the type of people that are going to look for that. And just when
Yeah.
you speak about being an issue, absolutely. Like it should be an option. You're able to set the debug port, I believe, using an environment variable or using a argument to the launch process or to the launch script.
Yeah.
So if they had the same option for your listing IP, totally fine. It's just an insecure default
Hmm.
in a little used function. So is it an issue? Yeah. Is it a backdoor? No. I'd have to kind of come down on that, say no. That said, speaking about kind of who the NSA was targeting with this, I mean, I don't see a big value in them kind of burning their relationship with our community. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it's already kind of stretched. It's not like, everybody's on good terms with the NSA. There's a lot of distrust anyhow. But
Hmm.
this reminds me a lot of like GCHQ, kind of like the NSA of the UK, when they released like CyberChef, a bunch of crypto tools and stuff. They're trying to appeal to our industry, to people who do this work. They're trying to appeal to us. They're not trying to turn us away. So by giving people a tool like this, we're able to learn it, we're able to use it, and then they can maybe hire out of that pool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I think
no.
that's like a big point for them.
When you also have to realize, man, like it's one of those things they advertise at like all kinds of conferences and shit. Like they want to appeal to the community. So I don't think it's like you said, why would you burn the community on something so trivial? For a very pathetic backdoor attempt, and as opposed to being alluring, fostering another community of reverse engineers, especially because when you guys were kind of discussing IDA, I mean, IDA Pro is how expensive is that?
Too
3,000.
expensive.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Anyone wanting to
Yeah.
get into it, that sucks. You know what I mean? So this is kind of the one thing that I've seen. You compare it to anything Hopper, you compare it to Binary Ninja. I mean, like it has a lot of capabilities that IDA Pro has that you don't have to pay anything for. So I think it actually opens up for the younger kind of community of reverse engineers, possibly
And
people who don't work for a company that can afford the $5 million fee to use IDA Pro.
yeah, and just adding on to that, even if you do have the money to buy IDA Pro, you likely can't unless you work for a company or something. They don't just sell personal licenses or like named licenses to anyone, mainly because of trust issues for leaking and stuff like that. So it's already pretty inaccessible with the price, but then it's made even more inaccessible by the fact that unless you have some sort of reputation or something, they're probably not even going to let you buy it anyway. So that is like another thing where Ghidra is going to be like a big tool for that for growing the community.
Which I think kind of leads to one question that I've seen a little bit, and that is, is the NSA releasing this? Is this possibly like an issue of national security? Should they not release this? Could this be abused by malicious actors? Like you said, IDA doesn't sell to just anybody, yet this is going to be freely available. And to be fair, this isn't so much coming out of like the exploit development. Um, oh no, how much of that could you hear? I've been told I'm cutting out.
We can most of it now. I think you're good to go.
All right. Well, I was just saying that there have been some questions raised, mostly by people outside of like the exploit dev, reverse engineering industry, because obviously this release has gotten a fair chunk of media. There's been kind of the question asked of, is this possibly hurting national security?
I could see that point. It's just like I feel like anybody who would be using it to harm national security would already have the means to do it anyway.
Well, and
Like
I
I
guess I
Yeah, like
what is the point that they're saying that harms national security? That because there's capabilities into this tool?
Yeah, so it's mostly people that don't understand what the tool does, to be fair. It's not so much people inside the exploit dev or reverse engineering communities that are saying that. It's mostly people that are hearing about this from the outside. They're raising it. Is this a national security issue? Because, like, is it like releasing malware to malicious actors? Kind of like, IDA isn't selling to just everybody. IDA is selling, they try and verify it a little bit, yet Ghidra is going to be available to everyone. Um,
I mean, this is a tool that like you're using it, you already have the capability to do, you know, the type of behavior people are talking about, and you can do that with IDA Pro. You can do that with whatever. I think. I mean, I think people are confused because of like, wasn't it? It was Eternal Blue that was from the NSA that was
Yes.
leveraged
Yeah.
in NotPetya and shit like that. You know, I think people are trying to equate it the same way, and that just comes from like a big misunderstanding of actual exploits and something that is for reverse engineers. And especially with people that probably struggle you know, with the understanding of, okay, what's an exploit versus how I'm finding it and stuff like that. I think that's just what's happening here is that fundamental misunderstanding. And like when people kind of fearmonger and go, well, criminals can use it. Most criminals could use any tool that any normal person could use and, do something bad with it. I don't think this has honestly, any inherent bad guy stigma to it.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, unless you're writing like a nation state level malware and you're putting, 0 days in your malware that you need to reverse to find on closed source software, which is pretty specific, you're not going to be using a tool like Ghidra in malware development anyway, right? Like you don't need to reverse engineer something to write malware necessarily unless you're putting a 0 day in it. So yeah, I just don't really see how it enhances the capability of bad actors in any way, really.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I just wanted to bring that up because I've definitely seen it in a few places. It's just kind of comes down to this is like releasing a better hammer. I mean, the hammers are already out there. Anybody that needs this tool, they already have it. This is ultimately, I think, making the industry better because it's bringing the tools, making it more available for those of us that do security.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's merit in describing it also. Like even just the hammer, kind of pointing it as like a hammer of all the tools, just a better hammer. It would be so much different if it was like a tool that was just like a SQL injection scanner that the NSA released, and they're like, "Go to town, guys." This takes actual skill and capability to leverage. To be honest with you, you have to be a reverse engineer to find use from this. So it's not. I would say the biggest like issues are tools that are released that almost any low level individual could use to then go cause harm. This is a pretty, I don't want to say sophisticated tool, but again, if you're analyzing binaries and stuff like that, you know, I don't think that you have anything to be really all that concerned about.
Yeah, it's not really a tool that script kiddies could use. Like it requires skill to be able to use it.
Well, not yet. Just wait. Just wait until somebody builds a plugin that's like autopone.
Oh, you're cutting out a little bit.
What is it with my mic today? Um,
They found you.
but
Very
just
soon.
wait until somebody builds like this autopone plugin or something for it. Like completely changes the functionality. It now is Metasploit.
Hey man, that'd be awesome. I'm down for that. Anyone that wants to do that, I support it. That it can only be so bad, right?
Yeah, one topic that I did just want to touch on before we move too far away is the whole backdoor thing. There were definitely a lot of people commenting on the fact that it allows for remote command execution. And I remember one comment in particular was, yeah, but how many debuggers like you execute arbitrary code?
All of
As
them.
exactly, that's exactly my thought. Is like all of them like you execute like that's kind of necessary for a debugger to be able to modify the instructions being able or being run. So on that aspect, like even this backdoor, like it's an RC, but like that, it's a necessary. Like that's a necessary feature of a debugger.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can have a debugger that doesn't execute arbitrary code, but it'd be kind of a shitty debugger.
I don't know
Yeah,
what you'd
that's
use
it.
it for.
Well, it defeats the whole purpose of the debugger. So what is? I don't know what. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just wanted to pull that up before we jump too far away from that topic.
But to
Okay.
be fair, that's a good example of even what I assume this person was technical. Even technical people can get its capabilities wrong and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I saw that in like Reddit R programming or something.
Pretty
So
sure
like,
everyone on
from a
Reddit's an
developer,
expert.
somebody who's roughly familiar with maybe who doesn't use a debugger in the same way that we would.
Right. Right. No, completely agree.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the next topic, moving on a bit from Ghidra, is you brought up the hacking car alarms article, Gone in 6 Seconds.
Do we
Uh,
want to jump on that first, or perhaps we want to talk about the couple questionable CVEs, since that kind of ties in with should the Ghidra thing even have a CVE?
okay, yeah, okay, good
I
point. Yeah,
think
so
that would
we'll
make a
move on to
better
that.
job.
Yeah,
I
that's
agree.
true.
So to kind
So,
of tie that, the I don't know if anybody's actually filed for one, but I know on the GitHub someone put in a CVE placeholder in like a little security advisory like text file, or it was in the README or something, indicating that this backdoor was CVE worthy. And
oh
I'm
man,
mixed on that. Like, on one hand, okay, it shouldn't listen on the wildcard port. I don't think it's a critical. They had called it a critical CVE. If I were reporting on this in like an actual assessment, I'd be like, this is an insecure default. It's hidden behind like you need intent. You have to be intending to get the debugger. I would probably end up calling this a low.
I mean, yeah, for me, a CVE has to have like, you know, the likelihood, like at least a small likelihood of it being used, like weaponized. I don't
Well,
know if
so
that's
there
the
is
best way to look
though.
at it.
I mean, let's say you're targeting one of the Ghidra developers, somebody who's actively working on Ghidra. So you write malware that's going to cause a bug. Here's your bug sample for them to run inside of Ghidra or whatever. And you write it in such a way that's able to abuse. I don't know how you do that part of it. Uh, or you have other malware that's also able to run on, their test machine. They're like it's not their main machine. Although I guess since they'd be running Ghidra inside of VM, it doesn't really matter anyhow. I could still kind of like if you're running Ghidra on like your main machine, it shouldn't be listening out to the network unless you need that. Like there is a
Yeah,
very small chance of that being abused.
but
But
there is also that requirement. Oh, sorry, I cut you off there. Did you want to?
well, I was just going to say, but it's also, like I said, extremely unlikely it's being used, and it's a necessary feature. Like that is the feature you're enabling. So the
Yeah,
only issue is the fact that it's listening to the network instead of only local hosts. And at least I know in my case, listening to the network is what I want almost every time because I almost always run this inside of a VM anyhow. Like these
yeah,
types of tools I run inside of a VM. It's just how I run. Like it makes sense that it's going out to the network.
yeah,
But I mean, there is the argument to be made. Like, should it have a CV? Definitely not a critical. It's not an RCE. I
yeah.
mean,
It,
it's a
yeah,
necessary feature.
I
yeah.
mean,
I could support there maybe being a CVE, but yeah, like you said, definitely not critical or anything like that. It'd be a low impact.
Yeah, and like it's not the fact that it's not an RCE CV. It's a listening on the network instead of local host by
Yeah.
default. Auntie, it seemed
Anti,
like
you
you
have
might
something?
have something to say.
no, I mean, I guess I was going to pass a question to that of when someone requests a CVE, is there something do you have to have a certain amount that this tool is used? Like again, if there's a CVE in PHP, well, PHP is widely used, right? Is Ghidra really used widely enough, or you know what I mean? Like, is there a requirement beforehand, or could it be something that's used by 5 people and you can still request a CVE for it? Like,
You can
where's the
still
line?
request the CVE even if it's used by like 5 people. It has to it has to be a known bug. Like you can't get a CVE for a 0 day. There has to be some acknowledgement of the bug being there already. I mean, that can be somewhat private until the CVE is published, things like that. But it generally also goes up to like there isn't just one source that controls the CVEs. Like different,
Mhm.
like PHP, you probably report the CVE directly to PHP. But for all those small applications, you might just be reporting it to Mitri or like one of the default handlers of those requests.
Mhm.
But what they're mostly looking for is, is it a known bug? Like in game, you can't have it as a or is there something to kind of collaborate that it is actually a bug? which kind of also requires whoever made it to agree that it's a bug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least to get the CVE. That doesn't mean you can't get anything else. Like you can't you could probably go publish something on like exploit.db or something without a CVE, but to get the CVE, I think there needs to be kind of that mutual agreement to some extent. I'm actually not sure on that because I can imagine some cases where companies just don't want to agree that there's anything CVE worthy and CVEs are still granted. So my understanding may be a bit mixed on that. Generally, with my line of work, we don't expose our clients' vulnerabilities, so we don't report CVEs for them. We just kind of report right to the client, and they can do what they want.
Yeah, I mean CVEs are kind of like a a weird system, right? Like if there's CVEs that definitely shouldn't be CVEs, and then there's CVEs that are, legitimate, but then there's also other bugs that aren't reported through CVE. Like it's kind of a mess.
I
But
mean, do all these well-named things, like Dirty Cow and so on, do they all have CVEs, or is that like maybe your option
All
when you
that I
put into
know of do
CVE?
have CVEs reported with them, or all that
Oh,
I
okay,
can
I was like,
think of.
maybe that's the
Heartbleed,
easy
Dirty
way.
Cow, even Eternal Blue has a CVE now.
Well, and that's interesting because the NSA I don't think ever acknowledged it fully, right? Or did they? I think that like what part of the CVE was that there has to be an organization that they can notify, right? I
Well,
think
so
that
there is kind of the default option to just notify Mitri or
right.
some other company. Like if there isn't a specified organization contact for your application, you can contact like one of the default handlers. And there are some different groups that handle different reports. And yeah, CV 2017-0143 is the Eternal Blue CV.
okay.
So it does. There is a CVE for, and again, that was in Microsoft, so Microsoft had to acknowledge there's a bug, not the NSA.
Yeah, yeah, it was in
Interesting. That's a
Windows.
good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. Um, well, that's so onto the questionable CVEs. Do we want to jump into those, or was it the
Yeah,
compiler?
let's jump into the compiler one. I think if you want to
Okay.
pull
Yep,
that
so
up,
if you want to bring
Spectre.
up the
Yep,
yeah, I
you're
have
up.
it pulled up. So yeah, this was reported by somebody from Zero Day Initiative, ZDI. Uh, so yeah, there's the CVE 2019-0546, and it's basically the gist of it is he wrote a lambda that used the underscore ASM macro for or keyword for like a unsupported calling convention, and he found that you could corrupt parts of the stack, and
Was it a
yeah, so
corruption, or
here's
would it result in basically being able to read parts of the stack that you shouldn't have?
you could read or write, so you could
Oh,
just
okay, you could write.
yeah, so you could leak stack data, and yeah, you could also corrupt it.
Yeah, I guess since
S-
you control the code there, it makes sense that you'd be able to corrupt it too.
yeah, so the conditions are that the lambda has an implicit capture and that it contains the ASM block. Um, so that's his proof of concept there. I think that shows up. That's big enough, right?
It's big
Yeah.
enough on my screen, so
Okay.
Looks good to
So
me.
yeah, so right here, this move YEAX is where the corruption happens. So yeah, he did, they did this big write up, and there was a CVE for it, and I saw a lot of people saying that, this is kind of silly that it's being reported as a security issue and got a CVE. I'm kind of on that boat as well. It seems very specific. Like it is an issue that, the compiler is generating code that is, uh, creating memory corruption where there isn't any obvious sign of that in the source code. But it's like that underscore ASM key tag is not supported by MSVC as far as I know. Like it's not compatible. It's marked as incompatible, and that is actually how Microsoft fixed it. Is I think they actually just made it so if you write code like this, if you ran this POC, it would just not compile. It would say you can't use the ASM tag in a lambda like that.
Yeah, so was it restricted though before this was like I know the error wasn't there, but did they say it was incompatible before this was reported?
Oops. Um, I've I know they said it was yeah, like it's directly mentioned in here that the target function's calling convention was incompatible with MSVC. So like
Okay, so
yeah.
I'm going to say though, like I kind of disagree with you. I The compiler has one job to compile code, presumably securely. We can argue about that. Um, the fact that there is a some type of code that can be compiled that results in a vulnerability that is the fault of the compiler tells me that the compiler has a vulnerability and that it is the compiler's fault. It is going to be hard to exploit, but I would still kind of put this at as a compiler vulnerability. Um, Again, I just have to say, like, this is the compiler's job to say that, oh, well, because the compiler's job is, it's going to be really hard for this to be used in actual attack means that any security vulnerability in it doesn't matter. I just think that isn't fair. It should be held to kind of the same standard.
But I mean, I guess it really falls down to who do you blame here? Like this code is not like, it's I could see this being chalked up to just being bad code. Like, if you allocate a buffer and then try to free it twice, is it the compiler's fault that it didn't stop you from doing that? Well, I would say no. And I'd say it's kind of a similar case here. It's basically says it's an incompatible calling convention. So you're already going into like, you know, it could be undefined behavior, right?
I mean, but
So
Yeah,
isn't that the
that's
crux kind of
fair.
a vulnerability though? In some ways, is that it wasn't supposed to do that, but the compiler is looking at it that's going, well, you really shouldn't do that, right? That in itself, that's how a vulnerability typically works. That's bad behavior. But I did want to ask before you guys get too deep into it. Did he ever provide a POC actually at the end of this at all? Like anything that
yeah, this is the
actually?
POC.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, it worked on, I think, Visual Studio 2015 is what this one's for, but I think it also worked on 2017. And this is the crash that the POC produced. So you can see access violation. So it's smashing the stack. But like, yeah, it seems like it doesn't seem like an issue. It seems so specific, and I could honestly put this to being a fault of the person who wrote this code, not the
Yeah,
compiler.
actually, that is a really fair point. I'll have to kind of give you that one. While I do want to say, I think
Oh, you're
that
cutting out a bit again.
I'll just have to get a new mic before we do this again, I suppose. Or maybe it has to do with that filter on OBS, but whatever.
You said NSA
Yeah,
too many times.
yeah, that's
Yes,
what it was.
that's probably it. They're trying to censor me.
So could you just say that again? Sorry, with the
Yeah, so I kind of did disagree with you, but you make a fair point about the coder's responsibility in terms of vulnerabilities, and the fact that if this was documented as being incompatible, if this is known like it's incompatible with this, the fact that you're using it, I mean, I'd wonder if it did have a warning there at first. But no, you make a really fair point about the fact that, it's the coder does have some responsibility here, and maybe I shouldn't necessarily put the blame right on the compiler to always block that. Like you said, double freeze being an
yeah
example of that.
yeah like my issue, my big issue with it is that it can be a very slippery slope. If you say that compilers should be responsible for not letting you do this, then how far do you go with that? Do you say, okay, well, they shouldn't let you use like gets or something that's obviously, you know, vulnerable or something like that, which actually I guess a lot of compilers do throw warnings for stuff like that. But like it just, I think it'll kind of spawn this discussion of, well, can I now submit a CVE for a compiler letting me do something that's obviously stupid, right?
Yeah, no, and that's fair. Like now that I'm thinking about it, I think you're kind of right that this is a case of the compiler doing what the coder has asked it to do.
Yeah.
It has side effects that the programmer should be aware of and should have known not to do.
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, when you look at the assembly code in this ASM block, you wouldn't think that it would corrupt the stack, which I guess is like part of his reasoning for it being a security issue. But like, yeah, it's it says right in it that this is not a Microsoft compatible calling convention. So like as soon as I see that, I'm like, okay, well then I would expect it. Like you should be
Yeah, like
accounting
the
for that.
calling convention is going to mess up the stack. Yeah, the assembly doesn't seem like that, but the calling convention.
Oh, you're cutting out a little bit again.
Uh, I just said like the assembly may not show that, but the calling convention. The calling convention is going to mess with the stack. That's a calling convention.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that's that one cleared up. I think we're pretty much agreed on that. And I mean, I guess there is a bit of a discussion of how did this really get to be a CVE? Like who evaluated this? like I'm just wondering that. I guess it's not something we can know. We obviously don't know anybody inside of, CDI or anything like that. So, but that does raise an interesting question of how do you define a CVE, which
Well,
is kind of what this section is about.
I suppose that comes down to, we just have to look into more about the CVE process itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and he does link here that Microsoft actually recognized it as a, let me just see.
And well, I imagine it would have been reported to Microsoft, so.
Yeah, from Mitra, yeah. Okay.
Well, so Mitra, or however that's supposed to be said, they kind of maintain the whole CVE list.
Yeah.
That's why they're also kind of the default.
Yeah, I'm also a bit how is this, I don't know if I'd classify that as an RCE. I don't really know how you classify that as one. I guess the argument would be if that code was compiled into something that was hosting a socket or something. I don't know why. I don't know why they classified that as an RCE.
Remote code
I,
execution does seem
code execution, sure, but remote.
remote.
Because then maybe they didn't release the full details. If there's something maybe we're not seeing here, but just from the file alone, yeah, I don't see why it would be remote.
Because
Yeah,
you
that's
pulled
really
the
weird.
code off of GitHub.
Yeah, like I don't know where that comes from, remote, but yeah, it seems, yeah, it's a stretch. It's a big stretch to call that a CV, like a full security issue.
Did they give it a score at all? Just out of curiosity.
I can try. I don't know if it's in the.
I had a meter link in
Let's
the.
look it up. The NVD. This is what I was looking for. They actually. Yeah, it's a 7.8. Are you serious? Oh my god. Okay.
I don't know. I mean,
But see,
because you do get code execution, that does mean like your CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, availability are
But
all
like,
in high. So that kind of, you'll notice the three things on the right side there, CIA.
yeah.
Those are all set to high. That has a big impact on the score.
And
Um,
I mean,
I mean, so that kind of gives it the 7.8 because it is. You do have complete confidentiality, integrity, and availability. All of them are compromised by this.
yeah.
Attack complexity, though, you can argue. This one, though, actually, you'll notice it does say local. It's not a network, so they do have that kind of accurate.
Yeah.
Now, network definitely brings it up. I mean, attack complexity is always kind of a hard thing, in my opinion, to kind of classify.
It's very vague.
Like to say low or to
Yeah.
say high. But I mean, the rest of that I agree with. I mean, it's a local, you don't require privileges, it does require user interaction, scope's unchanged, and CIA is all compromised. I think the CIA aspect is what brings up that score so high.
Yeah.
But it
yeah,
is a code
you can't see
execution.
the.
You can't really call it anything less than that.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. But
Although, what exactly is availability in this case?
yeah, I see. I don't really understand that metric. I'm just trying to
Okay,
see
so
the
well, the
availability
CIA
potential.
triad. Um, it's a standard way of kind of measuring security, or like the three things you need to protect is the confidentiality, any sensitive data, any data in general. If you're able to exfiltrate data, like SQL injection, if you're able to do that in like a select,
Hmm.
that's your confidentiality. Integrity is like if you're able to do an update on that data, if you're able to modify it or change it in some way. And
Yeah,
availability is literally like, is it up or does it not run? Does it crash? Because crashing something would impact its availability, its usability.
Well, he was showing it, if it corrupts data, maybe he's able to actually crash the application, and that's why they're giving it such a high score.
Yeah, what I was more getting at though with that is
Mhm.
just like, availability of the end running binary. Like, does that need to be the one that's running? But this is a compiler vulnerability, and the compiler compiled just fine. It's the compiler's availability wasn't
Mhm.
impacted.
Right.
Although I
yeah,
guess you're not exploiting the compiler with confidentiality or integrity either. It's the end running result. So yeah, that makes sense.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty much summed it up with ZDI. The other one that we saw was the this one, Windows 7 main securely load dynamic link libraries. Did you get a chance to look at this one at all, Z?
Yeah, I've looked at it. Although just right before we jump, honestly, yes or no, CVE for the last one. I'm going to. I'm still kind of on the edge. I'm going to say no because I think
I'm
that is a coder issue. I think that's
I'm gonna
programmer.
say no as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd have to give it a no.
And while we're at it, what about for the JDWP? I'd actually
I
say
think
yes on that one, low, but yes.
yeah, I think there's more of a case for that one because it is definitely an issue. I think saying it's not an issue would be disingenuous. It's just, it's
It's
not
not a
a
critical.
likely attack vector or anything. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not a critical. Yeah, I could see low CV. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, no, I probably agree. I mean, it's kind of a very specific use case, but it's there.
yeah. All right, so Windows 7
Okay.
DLLs.
So, firstly, think it's kind of
Isn't Windows
interesting we're
7
talking about.
EOL'd, or
I
is
thought
it
it was
nearing
too. I
it?
actually looked it up. There's an
That's XP.
extended.
Well, yeah, there's
There's an
always the
extended.
extended if you want to pay, thousands of dollars, and if you have volume licensing, you can do that.
I think officially Windows 7 is EOL, but I think it's if you have the extended, it's good till 2020. I think that's what I
Yep.
saw. Um, but yeah, still kind of weird to report an issue in Windows 7 in 2019. But you know, so yeah, the issue from what I've read is mainly that Windows, if a program tries to use a DLL and it can't find it, it'll look, or if it can't find it in like a system level directory first, it'll then try to load DLLs in the same directory as the program.
Well, so does it actually do it if it goes for a first, or is it not that the user's like current directory is actually searched first? Because my understanding of kind of the generic issue there, I haven't looked at this specific
Uh,
one.
you're cutting out a little bit, just so you know. But I
And
did
We'll
hear the
fix
gist of the
that
question.
eventually. Um,
I did hear the gist of the question. I did actually see a comment about that on the NetSec thread. I don't know if I'll be able to find it now. But I think they introduced something, maybe not in Windows 7, but I think in Windows 10 they introduced something where it would look in system level directories first. Uh, yeah, I can't find that thread now.
yeah, because
But
I thought the default behavior on Windows 7 was for it to basically use your path to search. So your
for it
path
to use
doesn't,
what?
your path, like the environment variable path,
Okay.
and it would search all of the folders in there in order. So like your system32 and stuff should be pretty high up,
Yeah.
but if you had the local directory, if you had other things in there, then as long as you could get your DLL in the path earlier than the system32 or something like that, which your documents, if you have like a, I don't think that would be a default thing, but like there's a chance you could have some other folders kind of earlier in your path.
Yeah.
Like that is actually a reasonably common issue, just in
Yeah.
terms of like loading it and expecting the DLL to actually be loaded from the same directory in some cases. So like, a program that ships with its own DLLs, you might expect it that when they try and import the DLL, it's going to load it from like its program directory or like a DLL folder or something. So you
Wouldn't
can
that be
abuse
logical
that
though?
by putting it in another folder. What was that, Auntie?
Sorry, I was saying, wouldn't that be logical though? Maybe I'm not
Oh, that
been.
that is logical. But
So
in your
yeah.
code, how you should be doing it is actually telling it to look in that folder. Like you should be explicit with the path. You shouldn't let it search for the path or look for it to find it.
Right. So, and then this specific thing, it's actually saying that the vulnerability is that you're able to load a DLL from the same directory you're within, which
Well,
is
so
not.
it's not just loading, it's the fact that some of the standard DLLs provided by Windows 7
Mhm.
don't force it, don't provide the path. They will look for basically the first one in that path variable. So it's the fact that these are standard ones provided by Windows 7 that are
Okay.
loading in this insecure manner. Because this is like it does have a common weakness enumeration 427, like the CWE 427 uncontrolled search path element. It's a common weakness. And it's just the fact, it's not so much the fact that it can load from there, it's the fact that these are doing that by default instead of specifying the path to where they should be, or specifying the path at least a little bit more narrowly.
Yeah, it's a weakness, but is it a vulnerability? Like,
I would say yes. I mean, CWE, it has a CWE, so it's a common weakness. It is exploitable. And I imagine it should be possible for the standard DLLs to search. Although I guess that would remove the ability to overload them, like if you want to implement your own.
yeah. Like I think
So that
it's a
could have
case
been
of
a design choice. But if in Windows 10 they search the system one by default, then they've removed that ability anyhow.
yeah, I mean I think it's just a case of security versus convenience, right? Like it's just hard for me to classify that as a CVE, I guess. Like it's a well-known thing, right? Like it's been pretty well known that Windows has been able to do this forever, right? Like it's
Yeah, and
not
I mean, you
new
can do
or
it on
anything.
Linux too.
Yeah, so I mean it seems kind of like a cheap shot to kind of like snag a CVE for something that's been known forever and like you know what I mean?
Although, I mean, usually when you think about this, though, what you're thinking about is your user-land application. Your antivirus or something loads some security DLL, and you can replace that with your own code. You don't think about that in the same context of, your kernel 32 DLL is, I don't know if that's one of them affected. Like, you don't think about it as being something's built-in DLLs that are also doing that loading.
Yeah.
But I guess was this given its own, this specific one given its own CVE or CW whatever,
Yeah,
whatever.
they let me see. CVE 2019-5921.
I mean,
But it's reserved, so it might not keep it, but yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I guess because if you look at the post that it relates to or it links to, where they triaging a DLL planting vulnerability. I mean, it sounds like this is like we talked about. It's already a common issue that's well known, and putting it to a CVE, is that just to get it out of the way so people stop reporting it, or I mean, is it
I,
really?
yeah,
I
I mean, yeah.
okay.
Well, one thing I was gonna say was that the what we were talking about earlier is actually documented here. So it actually has the search order. So it first searches the directory from where the application was loaded, then it uses the system directory. At least when this post was written.
Okay, so yeah, you drop it in there in the same folder. That makes sense. I'm not big on all the Windows internals.
So that being said, though, I mean, if we consider how you would need to attack this from an attacker point of view, you would first need to get an application into Like, let's say the downloads folder, let's say a browser drive-by or something. Chrome, you direct your target to some link that downloads an executable and downloads a DLL. Well, if you have them downloading an executable and they have to run it, then that's already an issue, right?
Well, but this would just be a
So
DLL. You can do a drive-by download, so it doesn't prompt anything.
what's that, sorry?
This, I'll just get to my point actually. Uh, Privilege escalation would be the big place where you could use this. You
Yeah,
drop it in, you get it loaded, so it'll be loaded in a program that, runs a system. You replace one of those DLLs. You get it as an escalation rather than looking at it as somebody from the outside trying to do it. Escalation would be a big place to use that.
but then you have that requirement of they need to be able to get that DLL into that directory. So, if you're running an antivirus or something and it has DLLs, you're gonna need some way to write that DLL into that folder, right? And
Which
like, how do
presumably
you?
should be protected, hopefully. But if it's
Yeah,
not, or if you're running a program out of your downloads folder, for example, which I presume you're not running your antivirus out of downloads, you've actually installed it, but there are
yeah.
cases where like it definitely could be used where you drop that DLL, just do a drive-by download of it, and then somebody goes and they're downloading random tools or something, and they just download and run.
I mean, it wouldn't be hard to drop, if you're able to get even a user to open a compressed zip, right? How many times people are infected, that it wouldn't be hard to have multiple files, you have the DLL with it. I don't think that it's actually all that hard to fool someone into it. Malware does it pretty
Yeah, no,
straightforward.
I think it's definitely doable.
Um,
But is that a vulnerability or is that just a consequence of how the design works? Like, it's like, again, it's that convenience over security aspect, I think, which you could argue is bad, but I don't think it's like a
I think
vulnerability.
that built-in DLL should be securely loading their other DLLs.
Okay.
I mean, if your personal program wants to do that, wants to allow that to be overloaded, but I don't think I should need to have any worry that, um, whatever DLL I'm actually using from Windows, I don't think I should need to worry that that one has been corrupted or that one has been messed with by malware. That should be something I can trust. So I would say, yeah, CVE.
Okay. I mean, it's kind of hard, right? Because we don't, I don't work at Microsoft. I don't think you do, unless you've been lying to me. So, I mean, there
Let's
there
not
could be
talk
other
about that.
reasons. Like, there could be Windows internal reasons why it's done this way, but
Oh, there almost certainly are. Um,
yeah, it's
that's
just
just because there's a reason for it doesn't mean it's not a security issue.
the
yeah.
good thing to look at is, does it has a CVE, right? Does it have a score? I like looking at the scores to see what they define as
They
being.
gave it a
I have to look at
Oh,
7.8 or a
another.
6.8 using CVS V2 or
we're giving out some
CVSS V2.
they're giving out some heavy numbers
Oh,
nowadays.
that's not
Jesus.
even. I
It
can't
if
find
you
them.
it's on the page. If
Oh,
you
is
just
it?
scroll down, yeah, you can see
Okay, you can
right there,
expand
and
it.
you can expand it to see what they gave
Okay,
if you
I
don't
see.
read the matrix.
See, it's happening again. The CIA is the question. I feel like I'm starting to misunderstand. Is like the availability impact, right? It's listed
Yeah.
Well,
as high.
because this gives you code execution, because you control code execution, you can pull down all the data on the machine. You can modify, all the files on the machine, and you can bring down any program on the machine.
Well, so
So
then
it
it's
is
fair
high.
to so a base score will almost always, if it's a code execution, will almost always at least be a 7.
Yeah,
If
like
it's
if it's code execution, you're going to have a pretty high score there, even if it's a difficult to exploit. And there are kind of more layers to the CVSS score,
mhm.
but they're used like for your particular instance or running it. You can kind of uh, reduce the impact of certain things and all of that. Like there are more ways to customize this, but your base score is just using these really basic ideas to give
Right.
you an idea of roughly how important this issue is. And remote code execution is something you need to think about. I mean, if you want to decide that it doesn't matter or you're okay with the trade-off, that's okay. But it's still like it's important to look at. So it is worth, I think, the 7.8.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I definitely have less of an issue with the CVE for this than I do of the uh, C++ compiler one. It's just that fact that, it is a widely known thing. It's kind of odd for somebody to just now report it. Like, that raises the question, why hasn't this been reported as a CVE before? Why now?
Well,
Right?
so I mean, they could have in the Windows 7 deals, they could have done them a bit more securely in that sense. Now, again, there are probably system like internals that I'm not aware of that have an impact, but just taking kind of the issue there are ways to do that securely to prevent it from searching the path and to always load the same DLL. I think it's just a choice. Like, I think it's a security issue, and I think it's one that Microsoft can rightfully kind of ignore or not or won't fix. Basically, it's
Hashtag
something
won't fix.
that pretty much like I think it's an issue. I think it's worth the discussion of do they want this? Are they okay with that risk? I imagine that discussion's already been had, and they're okay with it because
Yeah,
there are the obvious
likely.
trade-offs. But it is worth the CV. Just say it's there and leave it at that.
Yeah, okay. I can concede to that, I guess. So I guess we can move on to some definitely appropriate exploits.
I don't
Not
know. Do we want to
not these fake ones.
question whether or not the Chromo Day is?
Well, I was
Actually,
gonna
before we
I was
go
gonna
there,
start with the. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, jump back to the one we skipped, the car.
Oh, the gone in 6 seconds. Okay, we can go with
Yeah,
that.
at least touch on it quickly here. I mean, we are supposedly our tagline is 0 days for day zero, so might as well talk about this little O Day there, which I find it interesting that this actually like the same vulnerability was found in multiple vendors. Just for everybody else. The kind of standard technique for dealing with unlocking cars is you intercept like key fobs. Uh, you intercept the first code that comes out there. The user goes and pushes the button again because their car didn't unlock, and you replay the stored one and you store the new one. Now you have a code, so you can unlock the code or unlock the car at any time. This thing, it's these aftermarket um, car alarms, lock, like full systems there. Like these can start the vehicle. They're like these smart, I don't know, smart fobs. I don't know what you'd really want to call them, but you install it
Smart
into your
tech.
car aftermarket, and you can kind of get all those smart features: unlocking the car, starting the panic alarm on the car, stopping the engine, doing a bunch of stuff. Some features aren't available on every car. It depends on what the car itself actually supports. But there were two kind of vendors here, Viper and Pandora, and they essentially just had a web API that you could basically call like slash your car's ID slash unlock. That's not exactly what it was. I think if you scroll down actually on that page,
Yep.
it'll show one of the requests. Keep going. Yeah, right
Maybe this
there.
one here.
That's
Yeah, update, and
okay.
then
So in
the
this case,
yeah.
that one's just user information. I don't know if they show like the engine stopping or whatever.
Uh, where is
No,
it?
that's just user info again. Yeah, maybe they don't show it. But essentially, you've got just a simple request without authentication. You just need to know the ID. You know the ID. You can do all of these features on the API.
Yeah.
And I find it so interesting because, like, this is ultimately a direct object issue, like direct object reference issue. And
Yeah, I was gonna ask you a bit about that because I'm not incredibly good with web, so I don't really encounter indirect object references really, but I was gonna
just
ask you what
direct, not
that says.
indirect.
Oh,
The
okay,
idea
I thought
is
the oh, okay, I don't know where I saw indirect. I thought it was indirect. Okay.
no.
Sorry, go ahead.
The basic idea is just if you know the ID, you can impact it. So you can literally go through. If you look at what the ID they showed there, it was just a number. So presumably you can go make that same request and change the 772 to 771 or 773, and you'll impact another car. And just kind of keep incrementing that number because that ID is predictable. As long as you know that ID, you keep incrementing it or decrementing it, whatever you want. Start from 0 and work your way up to 86,000 and lock 86,000 vehicles. The issue is
Which is
just the
crazy.
fact that they don't do any authorization checking to make sure you're allowed to access that vehicle. And these
Which
have all
is
been patched,
insane.
presumably by implementing some of that, so you can only access your own vehicle. But that's kind of the gist of the issue is when you can uh, just specify an ID and interact with any other user, regardless of your authorization to do so. And I mean, it's not an uncommon issue, but it's not super common either.
It does
Like,
say
it's
up
one
to
of those,
3 million. Up
like,
to 3
it's,
million.
well, I'm thinking about the direct object reference itself being,
Oh, wherever.
like, in general web, like, it's definitely out there. It's not unheard of. It's common enough that I'm pretty sure it's a WAF's top 10.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like I don't know
it,
what no yeah, insecure direct object reference A4. So like it's common enough. I don't know. I find it surprising that it's two manufacturers in the same industry with that same issue, and they're different
probably made in
APIs.
China.
Like I
Probably
thought
made in China,
maybe,
and that's how it works.
yeah. Well, I guess there was a report recently about they had a bunch of developers on like freelancer.com, I think, or maybe they had done students and freelancer. I'm not sure where their sample size was, but they had like 40, 50 developers all write a login prompt, and over
Mhm.
half of them didn't hash their password or like do any password security. They were plain text passwords.
That's for
Um,
speed.
yes, for performance reasons. So
Not a
I
bug,
mean,
more fix.
there's definitely developers that just don't really think about the security.
I
Not
mean,
necessarily in China, although I don't know where a lot of the freelance teams are. I know the one time I used Freelancer, I think it went by a different name at the time, but I had, hired it was from Asia, so maybe there is a lot of people kind of over from there, but I don't know if I want to just draw the blame, calling it Chinese coders. I think there's people local that don't necessarily think about security either.
oh, I was pointing more towards like hardware. As a lot of these like
Oh,
um,
okay.
companies in China will kind of build like a base piece of like hardware with some software, and a lot of times these lazy resellers don't give a shit to really change much. They just go and maybe edit it a little bit, but the default stays the same. So then you've got vulnerabilities that can affect a wide range of hardware and software because someone was more interested, obviously, in making money. Could you scroll down a little bit? I just saw something that kind of made me laugh just a little bit more. Let's stop right there. Let's see. Military means security. I just like the way, I just like that part.
I didn't even catch that.
I
Um,
like that.
yeah, but I think this raises an interesting discussion, especially in regards to cars, just because they're basically big metal killing machines if they're not operated properly. I think it raises an interesting discussion of if we even want the possibility of these types of things being remote. Like, if an attacker can do something, which, with these vulnerabilities they can, that's pretty scary, right? Like the ability to, you know, basically somebody could hold your own car hostage on you.
And I think I've seen video on YouTube where they bring out like an antenna or something and try and get the actual signal from inside the house to steal it, and then go and will unlock the car. Like I could try and find it.
Well,
It's
that's what I
basically
was talking about early on when I said kind of the standard technique for breaking into cars was intercepting, storing the initial
You're
this
line.
is
breaking up
all
again.
remote. This is remote, I believe, is what's going on here. Correct?
Uh,
Yeah, so you can access it from like a web panel, I think
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. This is like online.
I mean, is that just laziness though? Is that just design choice? Because I don't know. I mean, it just seems like casually like not giving a crap. Like just very lazy coding, like we were talking about with
Or just not thinking about it, not realizing that people can predict those APIs or that people are even going to look. I mean, that's kind of a big issue with a lot of developers is do you even look? or is anybody going to notice this? Are we big enough for that? Um, Now, touching on what Spectre mentioned, though, do we want it? I mean, I think people do. I think people do want that convenience because there's a huge convenience to, start your vehicle remotely and, let it warm up while you're in the store or something. Like,
From from a car, like your keys, sure.
well,
From
but you're
like
not
an
always
app.
close enough. Like, if you're in some large mall or something, you want your car to start and warm up because it's cold out, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean, I
it's a
Canadian
think
feature
life.
that I think people want, and I think we're going to start seeing more of it. I think the issue is people also don't really hold security or don't hold companies accountable for their security.
Yeah.
I mean, that's IoT. That's IoT in general. You look at there's like IoT toasters now, dude, because someone just can't help but wake up from their bed and have to tap the app to start their toaster so they can get some fresh toast when they walk into the kitchen. I mean,
I prefer scheduling my toast.
sync it up to my Google Calendar so I can have it right before a meeting.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, okay, I can see the want for the features there, but yeah, like it definitely security needs to be not only on par with other areas, but I think it needs to be above it just because of how much more impact there is in like the real world with this
I
kind of
think
stuff.
just because this is an aftermarket thing, they've I don't know what the regulations are. I'm kind of
Oh,
thinking
you're cutting
I'm
out.
cutting out. Yeah, I can see how
Yep,
I'm
I
flashing
see
it.
it.
Um, yeah, I don't know because this wasn't happening when we normally talk.
I know, it's never happened before. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
so as soon as we do this, but I'm thinking of Comma AI. You remember GeoHot's thing where I was saying that I thought he was just trying to pump that thing up, get an investor in to get money and then get out.
Hmm.
Like a
Before
pump and dump.
before like whatever the DOT or whatever actually took him out and the DOT got to him first. But I guess that's another topic. Um, my thought though is, he had to shut down because of regulations on that, and I'm wondering like how this aftermarket to lock because it's not driving. I don't think like they have the same concerns as like your actual vehicle manufacturers might have.
Hmm. Yeah, like yeah, that makes sense.
I will say there is like creepy implications for this. Not to get too Orwellian on you, but I mean, if you do look, the one thing that should be kind of noticed is this isn't like I think the shitty part with the cars is it's not like someone takes over your computer, it sucks, and you could probably get ruined pretty well. But I mean, it's like you talked about earlier. The I think the implication should be nowadays that like the actual life in your hands, like it shows one alarm brand allow drivers to be snooped on through the microphone, and the car
Yeah.
engine can be killed. Like these have like really at least dystopian, implications. Is it happening? Who knows? I mean, I think that's the creepy part. Is it's not like with your phone. Yes, it gets hit with malware and can do a lot of creepy stuff, but I don't think your life is really in danger, and I don't think it allows I say that phones allow for a lot of control, but again, allowing so much for your car to be controlled that you can be tracked wherever you're driving, where you're parked is likely where you are, right? The alarm to be disabled, so if someone was trying to harm you, you would expect you're safe in your car. But I feel like that gives you this fake sense of security. And I mean, again, just everybody talks about it, and we haven't seen it as far as we know yet. But killing someone's engine on a highway, that could be literally instant death. um, so that's
Yeah.
kind of the shitty part with these types of things is with other servers. There's obviously real world impacts, money's lost, and so on. But in these cases, people literally can die. I think is what's the creepiest to me.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
creepy, but like to what extent do you hold the developer responsible? Like, I mean, when I'm writing code, I do
Uh,
write some buggy code.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and you kind of cut out. Did you want to finish your? I mean, I think
uh,
what he was
Sorry,
trying to
I was
say
just
was.
adjusting my levels a little bit to see if that helps with cutting out. That's why there was that gap. But I was just saying, like, how far do we go with holding a developer responsible for those issues, or who do we hold responsible? Should we hold like the manufacturer, like because this issue in particular is definitely kind of a high level architecture design issue. This is somebody decide that was the right layout for our architecture and just didn't consider the security in there. But who do we hold responsible?
I think it's fair to hold the third party company responsible, at
The
least to
company,
the
not the
point.
developer, though, just the company.
The company as a whole, yeah, because they're offering the product, right? They should be holding their product to that standard to at least have authentication on those types of requests. Like that's like a
Yeah,
basic.
like, oh, it totally seems like a
Like
basic failing. Like, I agree there's an issue here, but, the CEO doesn't really know, or presumably, I don't know how technical the CEO is, but he doesn't necessarily know, like, about these design decisions, so shouldn't have been, like, somebody lower down the chain that's kind of responsible for doing that. And this kind of comes down to no standardization within development. Unlike with engineering, where they go, engineering, you get your like your B-Eng or whatever, like you get your degree there, you get the ring. At least in Canada, I don't actually know if the U.S. does the ring thing, but um, you get that, and like you've kind of, I don't know if there's necessarily an oath, but there's definitely like ethics involved with that. And within development, like I know my school had a ethics course. It wasn't mandatory unless you were doing like the honors in software engineering, but it kind of comes down like there's no standardization. Like engineering, they're responsible for their code, and I think if we did start holding developers responsible like that, the problem with kind of drawing that similar, like making it a similar program, is just that engineering is kind of like a lot of it's solved problems. You're doing the math, you're doing all of that, but it's solved. Somebody knows exactly. Presumably, I am not an engineer. I don't know exactly how it works, so I'm probably wrong on a lot of things. But nobody's going to see this video, so nobody's going to call me out. But we're kind of with development. It's all creative process in terms of the building, or at least it is right now. I could see that changing as more algorithms are developed, but it's hard to kind of draw the same lines. But I do see a need for that type of stronger both ethics and accountability for developers. I just don't know how we can actually go about doing it.
That probably comes at a company level and at an individual level, right? Where I think you're right in the sense, someone has to be held accountable, an actual human, because I think too many times that they blame a company and it kind of goes over everybody's head that a human was responsible for this at the end of the day, right?
Yeah,
Um,
ultimately it
it,
was somebody's choice.
so that's the part where I think you still have to hold companies accountable, because then they'll throw some poor fuck under, pardon my language, I should probably be careful about cussing, but they'll throw someone under the bus and go, yeah, it was Spectre who coded this for us, so it's definitely 100% his fault. And if you're someone that was just forced into coding something, like most engineers end up having to help code a whole variety of different projects, that you get stuck on this one thing that they're like, it's our smart alarm system for cars, and then before you know it, you're standing in front of a jury trying to explain that one day you were just a little too lazy and had one too many beers at your startup or something. I think like that's the slippery slope. Is there you got to find that middle ground for both company and the individual to be responsible.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm kind of reminded of Volkswagen and their emission cheating.
what's that?
With Volkswagen, they had kind of cheated emission. I'm breaking up. Uh,
Yeah, you are.
It's like a
you know what?
cliffhanger
I
every time you
am.
talk.
There's going to be a little bit of background noise, but I think it is the
The
filter that I
filter.
have on here. Yeah, so I'll just try and remember to mute myself more.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm reminded of the Volkswagen issue with the
Emissions.
emission cheating. Yeah, where they basically would somebody wrote code to detect that the vehicle was just driving in a straight line and the steering wheel wasn't being touched, and therefore switch into this other mode. And I mean, wow, that sounds bad. What if, how was that presented to the actual developer? I mean, I doubt they were told that they were cheating an emissions test, They were just, like detect this person driving in a straight line. Maybe somebody else was told to, like, when you get this flag, change modes because, the vehicle's not working as hard or something. Like, how much did they know?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think you could put the responsibility in this case with the car alarm stuff on the company. They should be like, if they had a security department, like I imagine a design decision like the way that the direct object stuff was handled would probably be done by like the lead programmer or whatever, right? Like there'd be a discussion about the design, and I feel like if the company had a proper security department in there, they would tell them, no, that's a bad idea. Like you have to put auth on this.
But
And
most companies don't have a proper security department. They have one
and that's
person who probably does, like, network security, not AppSec.
and that's what I mean. I think we should be holding companies responsible for having that in place.
See,
Like I
but the
don't
True.
think
problem comes is innovation usually is going to be small startup companies.
what's that? You
Like
cut it.
innovation, it must be my microphone that's the issue, I guess.
Oh, okay.
I think you could either point to quality assurance teams, right? I mean, they're technically supposed to find stuff like that, right? But I do think the idea of kind of enforcing companies to have a de facto product security individual might have to be something that's necessary in the future. That if there's something that a website gets hacked, I'm sure when Yahoo got breached, the head of security was freaking out, going, "Oh God, it's on me!" Right? Someone is accountable to some degree. Whether or not it was truly their fault, that was something that the head of you know infosec should have been monitoring for. Same thing with these products, is there has to be someone that goes and actually understand this and can say, hey, you know this is, I sign off on this being secure. And there needs to be standards too, to be fair with you. It's hard to give it an okay when there's not really maybe a set of standards for stuff like this new frontier of
Yeah,
IoT
the
nonsense.
lack of standardization, it makes
Yeah.
it difficult. Like I said, like right now, you don't really like if there were a standard, like you use this algorithm to do this, and like it's there you go. Obviously, algorithms, but um, without having, there's so much movement in the industry in terms of technology. Like, I mean, even look the last 10 years. 10 years ago, jQuery was still reasonably new. Like, actually, I think jQuery came out, like, what, 11 years ago? Maybe it's a bit older, but, like, and now look at the JavaScript engines. Like, what's the security in the JavaScript engine? Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like, just in general, like, this, the security research needs to be there. And as the industry keeps maturing and moving forward in technology, security kind of lags behind a bit because we don't know yet.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
whereas
fair.
with engineering, like there's a lot of research and it's kind of known for the most part. Like there maybe are some newer things that happen. I'm sure there are. But like, there's a standard set of formulas that you can use to figure out the stress on certain things by the shape. Like it's kind of solved in that sense. It's not easy, but how to get to the solution's already there.
Yeah.
Is it though? I guess I just,
Well,
yeah,
within
I would be.
engineering, not software, just
Oh,
engineering in
okay.
general. I think kind of the
Right.
solution, because I was making the comparison earlier with engineering, like they're responsible when they sign off on something. They are actually responsible for their code, or not their code, for like the blueprints or whatever.
Right. No, that's a good point. And I think that just has to be that then there's standards that enforce, I don't want to say harsh punishment, but you know, there does need to be someone, again, has some type of, de facto, here's what you need to have secured, here's how it needs to operate. And if those aren't in place, those guidelines, then, someone has to be, punished for that. Because again, we see now, this is the implication, is that it just takes one time for it to happen. And then, it's a huge uh-oh, for everyone.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just like with the small companies. I mean, they can't. Maybe I'm just making the same arguments that people were making when like GDPR and stuff.
You're
Like,
cutting out again.
uh,
But
I was just saying, like maybe just the small companies are going to have a harder time hitting that same security level. And to what degree should we be holding them accountable? I mean, I want to agree that like we need more accountability. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
argue against that. I just don't know what the solution really is to that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
it's not.
everything seems like it's wrong. Like just calling like a C-level exec responsible for it. Sure, ultimately the buck ends with them. I'll agree to that. But at some level, like maybe they did instruct for this to be in there, and the development team just didn't do it. Um,
But I think it's their
but
responsibility for
it is
ensuring
their
that it is in
responsibility.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a true point. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
No, no, I think we
Yeah.
can go back and forth on this for quite a while, but I think we've hit the main points.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I have any more to really add on that.
So let's talk about cows, or do we want to talk
Yep.
about Chrome?
I love. Well, we'll talk about cows because cows are more fun.
Yeah,
Uh,
honestly, just side note, I love copy on right phones just because we get those bug names that have cow in them, and you just imagine the cow. So Buggy Cow, the macOS Ode.
I love it.
yeah. Named vulnerabilities are always better vulnerabilities.
Well, I
That's
mean, it's not a real
they're-
vulnerability if you don't have a name.
yeah.
And a
Exactly.
website,
Yeah. Oh, we need a website. I don't think that's funny.
a
Um,
mascot. Oh, yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. So for those of you who haven't really seen it with XNU, which is Mac's operating system, there was this 0 day that was dropped. They gave Apple 90-day disclosure deadline. They didn't get it in time. The deadline was exceeded. So after 94 days, which was February 28th, they made it public. Um, I don't think it's actually been fixed yet. I don't think it's been addressed. I think it's still a 0 day. So, perfect for the
Well,
name of
it's
the
not day
podcast.
zero anymore, but.
Yeah, yeah, it's not day zero anymore,
And this was dropped by Project Zero. I don't think he mentioned that. He just mentioned they dropped it.
yeah, yeah. So it was dropped by Google, Google's Project Zero. Um, so a little bit of an overview of the vulnerability was basically the fact that, uh, you know, in memory when you try to write to something like a file, data, or whatever, uh, with copy on write, when you go to write there, it will make a new copy before writing there, and it'll write to the copy instead of the original data. Um, but if you applied a lot of memory pressure, which is what this pressure.c source file does, that memory gets paged to a .image file, and another program can then go ahead and write to that .image file to overwrite the original data. So you're basically just bypassing the copy on write that way. Um, so yeah, I thought it
Well,
was
so
kind of
didn't
interesting.
some of this have to do? Now, I didn't actually look the code as you did, so perhaps I'm mistaking something.
Oh,
But
you're cutting out. What was that, sorry?
didn't part of this have to do with the mounting, like mounting the image back, or was that what it's talking about when? Because I had read that it was mounting. I was imagining a hard drive mount, but because what I had kind of read there, and perhaps I should have dug a little bit deeper. I was looking at right before we started this. Was that it would basically share between the law process, it would share kind of the same data as long as you didn't try to write. If you try to write, it copies into your own memory. But the data that it was sharing, if you unmounted the drive and then remounted it, or at least that piece of data, it wouldn't be informed that it had changed. So you can, by unmounting and remounting different data, you would be able to kind of write the data to everybody. I feel like I'm missing something. Can you fill me in?
That might actually be another one because I think there was another copy on write bug for Mac that was published around the same time.
Oh, okay.
Um,
I'm talking about. I've got it as Buggy Cow. Is
yeah, I'm just
that?
trying to see. Was this what
Although
CVE
that
was
yours is
this?
saying from a user-owned file system image.
Yeah, this says
So is that
Bug Cow,
necessarily
so I don't know if
paging
that's.
it?
From what I was reading, yeah, it was basically. Let me just try to see it here. Yeah, it was basically memory pressure can cause the pages holding the transferred memory to be evicted from the page cache, and then when they're needed again, they're reloaded from that backing.image file.
Okay,
So
so and then the attack itself was unmounting and remounting that file so that it would change without informing the kernel.
well, I don't think it was unmounting. I think it was just by applying memory pressure, it was
Well,
forcing the
look, the
page
next
out.
paragraph though.
The
To mount file
normally,
system images, when a mounted file system image is mutated, they're able to modify that file.
Oh
Um,
yeah, okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah,
yeah, I
okay.
was describing it kind of poorly, but yeah,
Yeah, I
okay.
see what you mean now.
So I did want to bring that up. Like the mounting definitely has to do with this as a way to edit that file without triggering the copy on write.
Yeah,
So you can edit it for everybody else, including those high privilege processes in theory.
yeah.
So sorry, go ahead with your explanation.
Well, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what I've gleaned from it. I haven't like stepped through it in a debugger or anything. I've just been reading. I've reread the report a couple times. It is worded a bit weird. I found that's the case with like all Google Project Zero reports, but I don't know.
Yeah, I
Maybe
had
that's
actually
just
read, and I think you might drop the link to a Wired article, not to.
what was that, sorry?
I think you might have dropped a link to a Wired article because that's what I have here, not the actual Project Zero report.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I had that originally, but I wanted to get a bit more technical, so that's why I found the
The
the bug
actual report,
tracker.
yeah, which is fair. I
Yeah.
mean, that definitely has a lot more information than Wired.
Yeah. Um, but what I wanted to talk about a bit more generally, spawning off of this issue, is I know, like, it seems over the past year, especially, there's been a lot of cases with Mac. Not a lot, like only a few, but a lot in context compared to iOS, for example, of um, 0 days that are getting dropped, and it almost seems that Apple doesn't seem to care about Mac OS security as much as they do about iOS. Like,
Yeah,
is that
no,
just
I
me or?
mean, wasn't there something with like you could get root basically by typing root?
Yeah,
Like
there was a
there's
secret
some weird
password.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
What the fuck?
there was a secret password where I think it was just you type root and it gave you root privileges. It was dumb. Um, but yeah, it seems like you know Mac is kind of the forgotten stepchild that
Well, for so
Apple
long,
doesn't
people
care
were
about.
proclaiming like, "Oh, Macs are, they're not vulnerable to anything. You don't get malware on Macs. You don't need to run an antivirus."
Unhackable
Yeah,
TM.
oh yeah, unhackable.
Yeah.
Military.
Yeah,
Military.
military grade.
So
Um,
I mean, that I think that has to do with it, and people are finally catching up. Like, one, there's a lot of Mac users. Two, I don't think their source is audited as hard as well, it's not audited as hard as Linux, I doubt. And I mean, Windows, even though it's not open source, so many people look at Windows anyhow. It's been such a big target for such a long time.
I mean, there's published books, there's everything on Windows. I don't think I've ever seen really a community of people that interested in Mac OS internals, to be honest with
oh, well, there absolutely is. It's just not as public, I don't think. Google Project Zero pretty much has iOS and everything Apple on lockdown for security. Like they're
you. Yeah.
crazy on how much they go in on it. Um,
Well, I think though that compared to the Windows scene, it's far less, I would say.
oh
Um,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that is an interesting point I did want to ask is, when we see things like this, this is a privilege escalation. So like, you know, it may not be something worth falling out of the sky and, everyone panicking, but, I'm genuinely curious. I never really see many statistics on like malware targeting or campaigns targeting like Mac OS. Do you think there's maybe like actually a whole shitload of computers that have actually been compromised possibly that people just don't realize because there's no built-in antivirus in Mac OS. There's really no built-in anything. No, I know there's a built-in firewall sort of, but if you're infected, you're probably infected for a long time.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
it's
I don't know.
possible. Um, I definitely don't hear about it too much, but I think there's a fair chance, especially because in the last like 5, 10 years, developers have started using Mac a lot more. And simply because of that, that makes them a nicer target to compromise. More
I
likely
mean,
to
I,
Yeah.
have access to certain things or like actually get some decent data out of that versus just compromising them for credit card numbers or something, like being a little bit more targeted. So rather than like a big malware campaign, just looking at someone in particular.
yeah, no, I think for targeted, this is actually probably a good territory, especially if you notice a lot of people in InfoSec really use Mac OS because they can still do Linux type stuff without being on Linux. Without all the spookiness of running a Linux machine, you can still go into a terminal, right? Um,
It's a
so
lot
Well,
more
that's what
developer friendly,
WSL
certainly.
is for.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a scary use case that probably getting too crazy here, but people who are using it are developers, infosec types, and I don't know. That kind of leaves it open to an interesting group who would be targeting
Uh,
Mac OS.
but one thing, to be fair to Apple, that Microsoft can never seem to get right is their update system is way more streamlined. So with Mac and iOS, like covering that a bit too, you know, both are updated. Like most people are updated to the latest version. So you don't have that fragmentation of people on uh, lower versions of like kernel and stuff like that. So that is one thing where Apple is a bit better with security, is that everything is maintained updated. So yeah, there might be a 0-day dropped right now, but when it gets fixed, it's not,
When
that
does it get fixed?
vulnerability. Yeah,
That
that
that's
I'm not
kind of the
sure.
other problem. Like, yeah, when it
But
gets fixed, it
but
might
when
get
it does,
updated.
yeah, like that exploit is pretty much dead for most people. Like end days aren't really that useful on Apple stuff unless you're like in the jailbreak community, right? For attackers, it's not really, end days are not really that valuable. Whereas with Windows, I'd say they're more so because the update mechanism is just such a mess.
Well, and does Mac OS have the same backwards compatibility that Windows has had forever?
Um,
No.
I don't believe
Although they
so.
do have like OS X, I believe, has compatibility. But I think even that, even the major point revisions of OS X, OS 10, have broken some backwards compatibility. I don't think they try anywhere near as hard, and definitely when you leave like OS X and go back 9 and all that, um, they don't. I mean, they changed their architecture, PowerPC up to the x86 and 64 now. Um,
yeah,
so that kind of drops backwards compatibility too.
Yeah, no, and that's a big thing when you look at like malware. They obviously can get a lot of victims by looking at backwards compatibility. The OS X won't have that. So kind of to your point, Spectre, once Apple starts pushing out updates and stuff, it's really hard once that's burned. It's kind of at its end. There's no, even if they have an older version, it's probably not going to work anyways. To be honest with you, so that probably does limit the scope of available machines to target to some
yeah,
degree.
yeah, and yeah, I don't know for sure because I'm not in like the underground for malware or whatever, but like Windows definitely is a more interesting target for malware developers. And for mobile, I know iOS is, but that's also separate from Mac, so I think that's also part of the reason why it's just not really targeted the same way.
I mean, like I said, I think Mac can be targeted like when you're looking for somebody specific, like a specific developer or something.
Yeah,
But
like a
Windows, like
nation
you're just
state level
pulling
thing.
credit card numbers, you're trying to infect everybody you can. Windows is still kind of the wider soft target. Like it's
Yeah.
still a lot less defended. But it wouldn't surprise.
Well,
I have actually, now that I think about it, I have heard of at least one Mac OS campaign. It was a few years back though, but I have heard of at least one.
Okay.
I mean, it's probably the fact that you don't even really have to go crazy. I'm still convinced the reason we don't see such an explosion in like the quote unquote underground is because, you know, I think that they don't have to go that far to like find they don't have to use an exploit or anything. Like most Mac users, all you need to do, and since it's mostly targeted, to be honest with you, you know, you can have just a simple piece of Java malware that likely won't be detected by any antivirus on Mac OS because they're basically pretty underdeveloped anyways, and most people don't even have any since it doesn't have any by default. Why would you shell out for most normal people to go? Why am I going to shell out $60 for something that I don't feel can be infected, right? Um,
Yeah.
so it realistically it wouldn't even be necessary to look at exploits like this to go crazy. You can just hit them with the same old social engineers toolkit little Java malware you send at someone.
Yeah. Like it's not as necessary.
Yeah.
Um yeah. The only other thing I wanted to talk about with this is how do you guys? So Google Project Zero has always worked pretty closely with Apple, like for years. They've been pretty close with them, and I don't know how I feel about them just kind of dropping a 0 day because it reached the deadline. Like I feel like they should have, given how close their partnership is, especially. I feel like Project Zero should have given Apple an extension on that deadline before just dropping it.
So I'm not
Um,
sure, but I
but
think Project Zero will give an extension if the developer has been in contact with them and actually asked for it.
okay,
It seems like they're basically doing a won't fix with this.
okay, so
I'm
they're
not sure if
okay.
that's the case, so definitely don't quote me. But I
Actually,
think
there is a
they
link here. Let
they
me see.
um, do extensions if it's like in good faith. If the other party is actually trying to fix it, it's taking more time, whatever. In, in good faith, they'll do an extension on that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look there. There is an Apple link in here, and just I can't remember what the. There should be a CVE attached to this one. Uh, yeah, I can't find the specific one for this one, but yeah, there is a linked one in here, so it might be actually getting fixed. I'm not entirely sure at the moment. There's a bit of a discussion here. The Google Project Zero person said that the other one. So I think this might be the one that you were talking about earlier, the other copy on Writebug. But that one was addressed, but they don't have this one listed in that. So maybe you're right on that. I'm not sure yet. With them not wanting to address it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I'm just kind of going to give the charitable explanation and say that. Uh,
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
The
I don't
charity.
know, but I'm going to give the charitable explanation and just say that this is something that Apple has just kind of gone silent on, and therefore they're kind of within reason to just drop it.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely more than the 90-day deadline, so you can't really fault them for dropping it according to that. It just seems like a very odd thing for Project Zero of all people, of all entities to drop a 0 day like that. I thought that was a bit interesting.
Oh no, I think they've done so before, but maybe we can look into that and bring it up on the next week.
Yeah.
The good story of full disclosure versus responsible and all this. This could go on for hours.
Yeah, that
Like
Well, I
can.
mean,
And go ahead.
well, I'm definitely in favor of full disclosure. It's just the timing of it, right? Like,
mhm.
if you like,
I'm not
you could
in
definitely.
favor of full disclosure, so we can definitely have a discussion on this.
Okay. Like I like full disclosure after it's been patched. I think that's fair. Um, it's just yeah, where it's not been patched yet. Like
Yeah, it's definitely seems a bit odd for Project Zero to be doing that, but at the same time, I have to guess there's a charitable reason for it.
yeah, I could yeah, I agree.
I don't know, so I don't want to, slander them or anything and like be like, oh yeah, they totally shouldn't do this. I don't know the details.
Yeah, I just thought it
Yes.
was an interesting discussion, but yeah, it's hard to say objectively because we obviously don't have all the information. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess that's it with the Mac stuff. I guess the last thing would be the Chrome 0 day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Last Monday
So
morning go day. I guess it's not
so
morning, but
yeah. Uh, although actually, has it been patched? Hold up. I'm just trying to think.
well, they're telling you to update it. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
actually one
yeah,
of the interesting things is that Chrome's actually saying like go and update this. And it seems like
yeah,
that's largely because I mean so many of the Vulns in the past were targeting like maybe Java, although that hasn't been an issue since Java required signing. But we're targeting like the plugins, Flash being the other big one. So they
yeah.
could just kind of do a silent update. You can just update the plugin, doesn't even require the browser to restart. Whereas in this case, the ODay is against Chrome itself,
Mhm.
which usually it's like the type of attack you'd see at like Pwn to Own and stuff.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part that's kind of hidden in the details is the part that it escapes the sandbox too.
It
Um,
escapes sandbox, and they also mention uh, there's another 0 day that exists in Microsoft Windows that's yet to be patched, at least at the time of writing. That I think
yeah,
is really interesting. There's two, like, this is a full exploit chain 0 day in the wild.
or it
I'm,
was, yeah.
yeah, I mean, maybe not anymore, but I'm really curious about how targeted this was. Was this really just trying to hit everybody? Or, was this like part of somebody's exploit kit or something? Because you don't see 0 days getting dropped like that. Like, usually they're really targeted if they're going
Right.
to drop,
Yeah,
especially two 0 days, a Chrome and a Windows one.
yeah. So did they actually say that this was definitely found from like a sample, or
They
I'm
do
just trying to
say that it's used in the wild.
yeah,
The
I'm
person
just
from Google's threat analysis group.
yeah, I'm just curious about how they came to that. Like, yeah, I guess they probably wouldn't talk about that anyway, but yeah.
Well, I imagine, honeypots and things like that would be used. I don't actually know kind of a lot on what they'd be doing. Andy,
Yeah.
do you know kind of how the malware researchers would run a campaign to detect stuff like that?
So I guess can you give me the full question, like to detect like
So, I
uh,
mean, we've just got this case where they're seeing this Chrome 0 day being used in the wild. What would their campaign to detect that look like? To have
to
noticed
detect
that. Well,
people
to have
to
noticed that it's being used.
um I mean there's a whole, if you're talking about like security researchers in general finding out that this exploit's being used, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so it can kind of be all over the place, to be fair with you. It entirely depends on, sometimes these things are sold, honestly, in communities. So it's possible someone realized they had a gold mine that Chrome typically is not included in most exploit kits, right? They're obviously usually older exploits, and they're usually just Firefox and Internet Explorer. So it's possible that they just went out directly and tried to sell it, and someone was in that community. A lot of times, actual malware researchers will find it being exploited against endpoints, right? So if you have an IDS or an IPS, they may not obviously see that attack, but if you're able to go and see a machine that suddenly is communicating out to a known malicious network, and they track it back through the actual like network data, they can go and say, okay, from here we noticed that this traffic happened, right? A lot of like incident response will go back and build the traffic and can likely find that exploit hitting the machine, and it takes a lot of skill obviously to pull an exploit out of a pcap or something like that, but that's normally how it happens a lot of times. Or again, they've been tracking like malicious infrastructure for a long time and are able to observe new activity that possibly is related to that. Does that kind of it's really
Yeah,
long-winded,
that hits it. I mean, gives some idea
you
of
know.
how it works. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it seems like though they have seen this being exploited in the wild, detected that
Yeah.
somehow, but they've seen that. Sounds like they've seen this Windows one being executed at the same time. So like, I mean, that's definitely surprising to see a full chain exploit, 0 day exploit coming out here.
And I mean, this is
Yeah.
from Google too, right?
Yeah.
Like, did Google release this thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I mean, they
so
would
this
obviously.
write up itself, I think, is about from Malwarebytes, but Google Threat Analysis Group has commented on it. I
Okay,
assume
so
there's
that,
probably some, maybe it's just CVE, but there's probably some other resource on it from Google.
Lane, the thing to take of note here that's also interesting is it's not just a Chrome 0 day, but they said that there's an undisclosed Windows
Well,
0 day
that's
as
what I
well.
was saying, is the fact there's the two 0 days in this.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, the other interesting part is it could have been one or the other found out about it. Microsoft might have been able to find out about it. That I feel like this was used, if it's listing two of them that are related, this was used in a malicious campaign for sure. I don't want to say for sure and get shot in the foot here, but that's the only way it would typically make sense. So
Yeah, it
someone,
makes nobody wants to
it,
just drop these.
yeah, I mean, especially these are huge. I mean, expensive. A Chrome 0 day can fetch quite a bit, right? So I'm convinced that it probably actually was discovered from an incident and passed along to Google or Microsoft. That would be my random guess, unless they're actively searching for that and are able to find it. Um, is that what
Yeah.
they were claiming? They found it themselves, or?
No, I don't see anything claiming that.
No, I
I pulled up
believe
a.
it mentions it was
Oh, sorry.
found in the wild.
Yeah, so someone had been exploited by this, and the incident response was able to probably provide it to like Google or Microsoft.
Yeah, I pulled up a page on the stream here, and there's a little bit of details on the CVE, like where it was. It was a use after free in the file reader.
Hmm.
I don't know much about, Chrome's internals or anything, but yeah, I thought I'd bring that up because we mentioned earlier about more details on it. But there's not a lot. They even have a note here saying it's going to be restricted until a majority of Chrome users are updated. So
Yeah, which, I mean,
Yeah.
makes sense. Can't fault them for that. On the
yeah,
Malwarebytes page, they just say, Google is saying this vulnerability is actively being used in the
they
wild.
say what?
In the Malwarebytes page, they say Google is saying that this vulnerability is actively being used in the wild.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I don't remember the last time that I've heard about something like that targeting Chrome, like a potential full chain, user land and kernel. That's pretty crazy. But
I wonder if there's a report already out there, or if they've chosen to remain quiet about it. Like security researchers that likely saw it first. Um, I mean,
I assume if there is a report, it's not public yet. 'Cause almost any security researcher,
you're breaking up. What was
yeah,
that?
I can see that. Almost any security researcher is probably going to respect the need to be quiet about the actual vulnerability if somebody outside of Google found it. If it was somebody inside of Google that found it, then they're probably going to, have this kind of like Project Zero stuff, keep it quiet until they're ready to release the details. So I doubt there's a report floating around.
yeah,
And honestly, I could even see it being the case that there's never any full technical details on this like there is with Apple stuff. Because it's kind of interesting. Project Zero likes dropping public information about Apple products, but about their own, they're like, no, 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 no. We just want to keep that private. We don't want people knowing about that. So,
Well, I mean, that's their competitive interest, though, too.
yeah,
yeah. No, I think that's just the hard part. Is you know, it's I can understand it too, and if it's like serious enough, it's possible that it's probably for the best to not release it because it might segue into people finding a lot of ideas before you can even fully investigate it yourself, right? But yeah, I do think it is a little questionable.
Sorry,
so
you
I think
think it's a little
that's
questionable that they're not releasing it, or?
No, just in the manner that they're releasing it is.
Well, get everybody patched makes sense, and release the details later. It doesn't sound like this came out of Project Zero, so I'm guessing
yeah, I don't
their
think it
threat
did.
analysis group. I haven't read much from them, if anything. Like, I don't know if they have a blog like Project Zero does, or like Google Security or anything.
Well, the problem comes into like if you don't release the details, like when most people don't release like exploit stuff. Since this seems like a pretty sophisticated person, right? I think the bad part is like if you're an organization that's like massive, right? You're a Microsoft, you're a Google, or whatever. You would probably want to know, has this hit me before? 'Cause especially since it's Chrome, and I mean, I know most people that I interact with use Chrome because they assume that it's not going to be hit by exploits as common as the other browsers. That's something that it's being seen in the wild. So companies are going to go and talk to a whole bunch of little infosec companies, going, well, if this is being used, what campaign? And so it kind of just it's best probably not release it, but it does suck when you're trying to go and say, how was this used? Who was using it? So that you can kind of proactively work in the future to mitigate shit like that. But it completely makes sense too, as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. I mean, they at least they do say it's like a use after free and where it is. I mean, that's not a lot of information, and that doesn't help with big companies either. But that is more information I've seen with some things where it's just like, oh yeah, there's this issue and no information at all. Like they've kind of given a hint, so I imagine they're going to give more information at a later point.
Hopefully. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We can't talk too much more about it because there's just not a ton of
Not
technical
much to say.
details that
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
shame.
So CVE or no CVE for this one?
uh, yeah. I think it's worthy of a CVE. I think so.
Yeah, definitely a low. We're good.
Yeah, just a low.
I
Totally
don't have
can't
enough,
be chained or anything. With
not
sequence.
enough details. Rejected. No CVE.
Won't fix.
Won't fix. Cannot reproduce. I don't know.
That was kind of cool though to get that like, threat intel kind of view of it, like impact.
Yeah, I
So
mean it's good not to get too crazy into it, but it's good to also see like when you come from like a hacking perspective, you're like, oh, no one should know because it's safer that way. Where like when it's really serious, it really sucks not knowing because that's when everybody panics and like, what the hell is happening? You're like, dude, I don't know. I have no clue, nothing about it. Like I know it's the thing. Update, hope for the best.
Nope, just hope. But yeah, I think we've kind of hit all the main points for that, and
Mhm.
that's all of the 0 days we've got to drop today. So
yeah, we don't really have any more topics to
that's
discuss
all the
today. So
interesting ones I think from last week. So I think we
yeah,
can probably end it here and not have any real outro.
yeah,
All
we can
right.
wrap it up and yeah, see you guys on the next podcast. So we're doing them. We're planning to do them 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific, every Monday.
Every Monday,
So
day 0.
yeah, day 0. Yeah.
I'm cool
So
with that.
we'll be back again next week and yeah.
All right, well, talk with you guys next week.